Hello everybody, welcome to today's video. So today we have a 2020 presidential election matchup between Democrat Eric Holder, um the former Attorney General under the Obama administration, and Republican Donald Trump, the incumbent president, of course. So Eric Holder just recently said that he's interested in running for president, and he might announce his candidacy in 2019 for the presidency of the United States. And well, Eric Holder doesn't have that good name recognition. He's Obama's AG, but that's not a memorable or notable position, and we just don't usually see his name. Well, his name just sometimes appears on the television or on our smartphones when it comes to the Russian investigation or yeah, that Russian thing, which is related to the which in the case that is related to the Obama administration. But yeah, we usually don't see his name appearing, so he doesn't have that name recognition. And yeah, but his position as Obama's AG would help him with his tie to the Obama administration. It would give him he has that tie to the Obama administration, and that would help him with a lot of Obama voters and actually some African Americans. And Holder is actually an African American, so I think he would do pretty well with black voters and yeah, that word. But still, I think Donald Trump has the upper hand here. His approval rating is going up and up, and it's currently at about 46%, and his intra-party approval rating is the highest for and is higher than any other Republican president. It's at 88%, and that's unprecedented among Republicans. So I think that just that's a good sign for president. And yes, a lot of the economy is doing well, although Democrats are trying to rebut his claim about the GDP. But yeah, the economy is doing well. The situation around the world is going pretty well, I think. That's why his approval rating is ticking up, and he's becoming more and more popular gradually when time passes. So I think he would have the upper hand here. But no further ado, we're gonna fill this map with states that are safe for Eric Holder, and then states that are safe for President Trump. So 182 electoral votes for Eric Holder and 179 electoral votes for Trump. So first of all, the states of Arizona and North Carolina would go to Donald Trump. These are swing states, but they have pretty solid red identity. Yeah, I think President Trump would handily win these two states, and not to mention that Eric Holder is not a popular candidate. I mean, he's not famous. He's not renowned. He's not a renowned figure in American politics. I really don't see him carrying these states. And going into the state of Ohio, President Trump has a good chance here. He won the state of Ohio by an appreciable margin in 2016, and yes, Ohio is becoming more and more Republican. We can see a lot of counties shifting to the Republican Party side, and President Donald Trump also has that working class appeal, and yeah, he appeals to a lot of Ohio voters, a lot of rural voters in Ohio, and a lot of working class voters in this state. So I think it would makes it easy for the president to win Ohio's 18 electoral votes. So going into the state of Iowa, I think this one would hold on to the Trump column. I think Trump won it in 2016, just like Ohio, by a big margin, a considerable margin. And it's a major shift from the Democratic Party to the Republican Party. Iowa voted for President Obama twice in 2008 and 2012, just like Ohio. and then shifted to vote for Donald Trump, and did so by a big margin. So I think the state itself is turning more and more Republican, and yeah, we can see that President Trump appeals to a lot of rural voters in the state, a lot of agriculture voters, voters who are in the agricultural sector in the state. So yeah, President Trump would hardly win the state of Iowa, and Eric Holder just doesn't have that chance. He's not a notable candidate. He doesn't have that name recognition, and he to be quite honest, I don't think he has that enough experience. I mean, he's the AG, but yeah, Donald Trump didn't have experience in politics when he ran for president in 2016, but he has experience in business. He built his business, and he was able to inspire people, to appeal to a lot of people, to motivate a lot of people. But Eric Holder just doesn't have the ability to do so. So I think Holder would lose down the stretch here. But anyway, I think he would be able to win the state of Virginia. The state of Virginia, I think, is becoming more and more democratic, and President Trump just doesn't appeal to Virginia voters, those educated and more moderate voters. But yeah, in 2016 he lost the state of Virginia by not a close margin, and I think that wouldn't help him. That's just a sign that he wouldn't come back and win the state of Virginia in 2020. I think Virginia is too far for him to grab, but yeah, its 13 electoral votes would land in the Holder column. I think Virginia just votes for a Democratic candidate regardless of their identity. I think the state is becoming more and more liberal, but if the Democratic candidate is really weak, I think President Trump would be able to win it. So actually, I'm not gonna fill it just yet. Well, actually, I'm just going to fill it for President Trump, actually, because Eric Holder isn't a memorable candidate, a notable candidate. I think a lot of Virginia voters just aren't going to vote for him. I think they would vote for Donald Trump instead. And Nebraska's 2nd district would go to Donald Trump as well. It's pretty obvious that the district has become more and more Republican. It only voted for Obama in 2008, and it did so by a small margin. It just isn't gonna vote Democrat again, and especially in this case, in which Eric Holder is the Democratic nominee. He's not popular, and yeah, I think President Trump would easily win Nebraska's 2nd. And now, going into the state of Maine, I think President Trump would easily win the 2nd district. It went for him in 2016 by two-digit margin, and it's a rural area. President Trump has a rural appeal. I think President Trump would win it handily. But the 1st district would still stick to the Democratic column. It's just safe for the Democratic Party. I think, regardless of the Democratic nominee, the district would vote for the Democratic Party. But the state of Maine, there's 2 electoral votes here, would be flipped to the Republican column. They would land in the Trump column, because the race here was very close in 2016, and Hillary Clinton was the Democratic nominee, and I think she just appeals to some women voters. But in this case, Eric Holder just doesn't really appeal to any of. He doesn't have that political appeal to any voter group, any voter bloc, and I think he would easily lose this 2 electoral votes. And the state of New Hampshire would land in the Trump column as well, because the race here was very close in 2016, and Eric Holder is a weak candidate in my opinion. I don't think he would come back. The Democratic Party would be able to hold on to the state of New Hampshire. I think Holder just doesn't appeal to anybody, unless, just except some African Americans. But still, I think the state of New Hampshire would go to the president. he just lost it in 2016 by a very small margin. I think President Trump he can flip it to his column. This will be the first time since the election of 2000 the state of New Hampshire votes Republican, and now the Rust Belt I see President Trump sweeping it and receiving 46 electoral votes in total. I think the Rust Belt he won it in 2016, and although the Democratic Party wasn't so prepared in this region, I think President Trump would be, although the Democratic Party is now alarmed about the Rust Belt and his approval rating here is not, and President Trump's approval rating here is just low, but I think the Democratic Party, if Eric Holder is the nominee, would still lose these 3 states. Wisconsin is pretty obvious that a lot of counties in the state are becoming more and more conservative, and the state of Pennsylvania, I think, well, the Democratic Party won the special election here, but the candidate who won it was somewhat conservative. He's pro-life, and he's not a liberal. He's not a liberal Democrat. He's a moderate or somewhat conservative Democrat. I think the president would appeal to. That's a good sign that it's not depends. The state of Pennsylvania hasn't become a liberal. It's become more and more conservative, and President Trump can appeal to a lot of rural voters in the state, a lot of steel working class voters. He just raised the tariff, and I think he would just use that tariff to cite it as his help for steel workers and eventually capture those votes from the steel workers. And the state of Michigan, I think, would also land in the Trump column because I think if the Democratic candidate is somebody else, I think the state of Michigan would flip back to the Democratic column. But if it's Eric Holder or some other weak candidate, I think the state of Michigan would still cling to the Trump column because, Eric Holder just doesn't have that appeal. He doesn't appeal to rural voters. He just doesn't appeal to working class voters the way Barack Obama did, or the way Joe Biden would do, or the way Bernie Sanders or a bunch of other Democrats would do. So President Trump just obviously wins the presidential election and remaining the 45th president of the United States, but we ain't done yet, so we're gonna fill the rest of the map. So the state of Minnesota, this one I think would go to the president, and this would be the first time since 1972 the state of Minnesota votes Republican, and it's just noteworthy that even Ronald Reagan's landslide in 1980 and 1984, the state of Minnesota just voted Democrat, but that's partially because in 1980 the vice president candidate was, and who's the incumbent president was, Walter Mondale, and who came from the state, and in 1984 Walter Mondale was the Democratic nominee, and he came from the state of Minnesota. So, but anyway, I think in this case the race in 2016 in Minnesota was very close. President Trump just narrowly lose it to Hillary Clinton, and I think in this case Eric Holder doesn't appeal to anybody, and he's not someone who people would recognize. But Hillary Clinton, in the contrary, was pretty popular among, and yes, a lot of people recognize her. A lot of people just know her and know who she is, and she has that women appeal and minority appeal, while Eric Holder, although he's an African American and he has that African American appeal, doesn't appeal to women or any other group, as I said. But so 293 electoral votes for Donald Trump and 196 electoral votes for Holder. And now going into the state of Florida, I think President Trump has a good chance here. The state of Florida just voted for him in 2016, but it flipped from the Obama column to vote for him by 110,000 votes margin, and I think that's a sign that the state of Florida is becoming more and more conservative, and his President Trump base, the Trump base in the state of Florida is expanding. We can see that a lot of retired white voters are moving into the state of Florida for a retirement destination, and although there's an influx of Puerto Ricans and a growth in Hispanic population, I think President Trump would still win in the state of Florida at the end of the day, because his approval rating, in fact, among Hispanic voters is going up, and Eric Holder just doesn't appeal to these groups of these Hispanic voters. And yeah, Holder is not a memorable candidate. No, only a few people know him, and yeah, his President Trump, just one of the reasons President Trump won the state of Florida is that he appealed to some working class voters in the state of Florida as well, and I think those working class voters are still in the Trump column and would vote for him again in 2020, as well as those Republican voters, typical Republican voters in the state of Florida, and I think this state would just go to the Trump column by a bigger margin than it did in 2016. And now the three last states, the state of Nevada, the state of Colorado, and the state of New Mexico. Well, first of all, the state of New Mexico, I think, would still hold on to the Democratic identity, because it's pretty obvious that the state of New Mexico, and actually the state of both Colorado and New Mexico, and also the state of Virginia, are going more and more liberal. They, although they voted for George W. Bush, but yeah, actually these three states just shifted more to the Democratic Party side since the election of Barack Obama in 2008, and yeah, I think they are becoming more and more liberal. I don't see President Trump winning here. Yeah, and the state of Colorado, I think it requires a more moderate candidate who's somewhat libertarian, who's a libertarian, who has that libertarian ideology and more moderate views, and who can appeal to educated voters to win in the state of Colorado. Someone like Ron Paul, I think, would be able to win the state of Colorado, or Rand Paul's son. But President Trump, I just think, would win its 9 electoral votes. And now the last state, the state of Nevada, I think would go to President Trump. His approval rating here is doing well, and yeah, he just campaigned in this state. He just held his rally here not so long ago, and yeah, his rhetoric, his policy just resonates with a lot of voters in the state, and yeah, he appeals, and it's pretty obvious that there are a lot of Hispanic voters in the state, but they are more inclined to vote for Trump, as the race here was very close in 2016 actually, and Hillary Clinton is someone who has that appeal to Hispanic voters, but Eric Holder isn't. So I think this is a good case that for President Trump, that he would be able to capture Nevada's 6 electoral votes and eventually winning 328 electoral votes in total. So this is the final electoral map for this scenario of the 2020 presidential election. So if you have comments or suggestions, you can put them down in the comment section below, and you can like, share, and subscribe. And I thank you all so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed watching it, and so you can check out my other videos, the ones that are shown in the screen right now, and I'll see you all later.